Sean Byrne's Early Life. Written and narrated by Marion Jasper, author of the Lisa Marchant series. Connell Byrne was a very enterprising young man. He had assisted an elderly man in his small shop on the outskirts of Dublin, and at the back of the shop a few women worked, spinning and making basic garments for working people. Connell saw that this could be expanded upon, but the old man was set in his ways, and as long as he made a living for himself and wages for his workers, he was quite content. Many times Connell thought that he should start such a business and run it profitably, but his mother needed the wages that he brought home, and taking a chance on such a venture was not an option at that time. When Connell reached the age of 21, his thoughts turned to marriage, and he had met a young woman who was regarded as a good catch. Not that she had money, but she was from a hard-working and upstanding family. Her name was Fenella, and in the fullness of time they married and moved in with his mother. It was not an ideal situation, but in those days there was no other option. Within the year they had a child, but it did not survive, as so often happened in those days. They were more fortunate with their next child, and they welcomed into the world a boy who they named Kieran. He was strong and healthy, and Connell and Fenella were enormously proud of him. Their next child was a girl who they named Clodagh, and Grandmother Byrne doted on her to the exclusion of Kieran. The next two children were stillborn, and Fenella wondered whether these two children would be all that they ever had. She was not unhappy with the prospect, but Connell had always dreamed of a large family. During those times the old man who owned the shop died, and Connell found the small amount of money needed to take over the business. He often discussed his ideas on increasing the business with Fenella, but she worried that he was overstretching their finances. It was sad but lucky when Connell's mother died, and he took over the house and managed to raise a small amount from the bank, which he ploughed into the business and created a small factory behind the shop. The shop now became a store selling many more items, and he also created a section that also sold bread and cakes. This was Fenella's domain, and in a short while she took on a couple of assistants, which was necessary as she was now pregnant again. They welcomed into the world a boy and named him Rowan, and Fenella soon returned to work, leaving the child in the very capable hands of Clodagh, who, although young, was a very responsible girl. Kieran was at school, but Connell felt that Clodagh should not miss out on an education, so he hired a woman to come into the home and teach his daughter enough so that she could be useful in the business. Fenella suffered another stillbirth, and this time it took her longer to get over the experience. Clodagh now had to also look after her mother, but eventually Fenella was back on her feet and back at work again. The factory and the store were now doing very well, and Connell sold their home and moved his family into quite a prestigious house in a nice neighbourhood. He also increased the size of the factory, having extended the building on the spare land behind the original premises. The Byrnes were now moving up in the world, and mixed well with their neighbours, all of whom were successful in their various businesses. Their last living child was a boy called Tyree, and once again Fenella was unwell for a long time after the birth. Clodagh stepped in with the running of the household at that time, and they employed a nurse to look after the mother and baby. "I hope this will be the last child, as my mother is looking increasingly unwell with each confinement," said Clodagh to the nurse, which the nurse had to agree with. Sadly, a year later, Fenella had another child, this time a boy, but both mother and son died. The children in the family were grief-stricken, but Connell just got on with work and expanded even further. Clodagh took over the running of the household completely, but she still took lessons from her teacher. All the boys were now at the local school, but Connell was making plans for them all to go to university when each reached the correct age. Within 2 years of Fenella's death, Connell announced that he was contemplating marriage again. The children were horrified, as they were still coming to terms with the loss of their mother, and Clodagh especially was concerned, as it would mean that her control over the household would be taken from her. Grudgingly they welcomed Nuala Lincoln as stepmother, but they could see that she had not been a willing addition to the family. Nuala had been living with her sister and brother-in-law in a nearby village, and when Conall had shown an interest in her, her family had encouraged the association. "You won't get another offer," they told her. "You are reaching an age when your options for marriage are limited. I know that you devoted your time to looking after our father until he died, and that was very commendable. But it has left you unmarried and no prospects for the future. Conall Byrne is not a poor man, and you would never want for anything. He is not unpleasant. In fact, he is still quite handsome. You would be foolish to refuse him." "But I don't love him. And he already has a large family, who I know would not want me there," said Nuala, who was close to tears. "Perhaps I could get a job as a governess, and then I wouldn't be a drag on you." "That would be the worst thing you could do to us. It would embarrass us beyond belief. People would think that we could not afford to keep you under our roof," said her brother-in-law with some annoyance. "What has love got to do with anything?" said her sister. "Most marriages are arranged and they work out very well. You must seriously consider his proposal. We must insist that you go ahead with this association. We have business commitments with the Byrne's factory, and that could be jeopardized if you do not do the right thing." "Do you really think that it is the right thing? I am worried that I will not fit in with such a large family. They run the household, and I know they would not welcome any interference from me," said Nuala. "They will love you, Nuala, and you know that Conall will not put too much pressure on you," said her sister with meaning. Against her better judgment, Nuala became Mrs. Conall Byrne, and she was surprised as his family just accepted that she was there, and they got on with their lives as if nothing had changed. In fact, it had not, as the boys continued at either school or university, and Clodagh ran the household, occasionally referring to Nuala regarding a few decisions. Nuala's sister had been wrong. Conall's demands on her body were excessive, and it was only since her marriage that she learned just how many children had been conceived in the past, and Nuala was concerned that she would end up the same way as his first wife. Nuala was extremely interested in the business, and Conall was pleased that she was very efficient in the running of the retail outlet. People liked her, and she always had a cheery word for them. Conall felt that he had made the right move when he married her. He had a good business companion and a willing partner in bed, or so he thought. Sadly, Nuala had several miscarriages which affected her health, and Clodagh began to feel sorry for her, as she could see that for her it was not a marriage made in heaven. She knew Nuala's sister and brother-in-law, and realised that she had been pressured into the arrangement, and having realised that, Clodagh went out of her way to be nice to Nuala, which made her life much better. With Clodagh's encouragement, Nuala became a force to be reckoned with, and surprisingly, Conall appreciated that he had a wife who now spoke her mind, and some of those thoughts rubbed off on him, especially where business was concerned. A son, Sean, was born in 1817, and Clodagh looked after him from a very early age. Conall liked Nuala to be at business, so as soon as she felt able, she spent a great deal of time concentrating on their retail stores, which over the years had increased considerably. There were now many outlets in and around the Dublin area, and as the boys reached adulthood, each was given one of the outlets to manage. Sean was very much younger than his step-siblings, and it would be a few years before he became of working age. All in the family had been well educated, with the boys attaining satisfactory results from university and Clodagh reaching a standard that she could use as a governess, although that was not her aim in life. Naturally, Sean was very close to Clodagh, but he also had a character which made him liked by everyone. He was particularly friendly with a boy, Aidan Doyle, who lived locally and went to the same school, and was also enrolled in the same university as Sean. Aidan and Sean did everything together, and they seemed to live in each other's houses, and there were times when each family presumed that they were eating with the other family. They both achieved extremely good results from their time at university, and they both discussed what they felt they would like to have as a career. Sean was not too happy that his working life had been mapped out by his parents, which was, of course, the management of yet another store, which his parents were in the process of setting up. The Doyle family were also not without funds, and they were keen that their son took over a small holding that they were negotiating terms on. Neither Sean nor Aidan were excited about their futures, and they often discussed alternatives, but neither could enthuse over any other career, so reluctantly they bowed to their parents' wishes, but were determined to enjoy their time before they had to take over their responsibilities. Sean's older brothers were all now married. It had been easy for them to find suitable wives, as the Byrne family were known as extremely financially eligible. Kieran and his wife lived in the family home, which they would eventually take over, and also Kieran helped his father to run the retail store and the factory. Rowan and his wife lived near the retail store that they oversaw, and Tyree and his wife occupied premises near their retail outlet. Connell had certainly created good lives for his family, and he was expecting the same for Sean. Countless girls were paraded in front of both Aidan and Sean, and whereas Sean treated them with perceived interest, Aidan shunned them to the point of rudeness. Sean questioned Aidan about his attitude towards the young ladies, and the only reply that he ever got was that they all seemed to be rather unintelligent, and he did not appreciate them throwing themselves at him. "They don't all really throw themselves at us, Aidan," said Sean. "Some are shy and do not push themselves forward. Unfortunately, it seems that their mothers are keener to introduce their daughters to us than their daughters are keen to be introduced. I'd much rather spend the time talking to you than having to listen to the inane conversations that most ladies are only capable of," said Aidan. "Well, I have to admit that I have not come across anyone who holds my attention, and I really would prefer to not have to consider marriage yet. And you are right that our conversations are far more interesting than anything that I have heard from the young ladies," said Sean. Reluctantly, Sean began his retail store career. He did not concern himself with customer liaison, although people did like him. He was more concerned with the financial side of the business, and after a short while his father realized that he was extremely competent with keeping the books and also on ideas of how to promote the business further. Connell decided that Sean would be more use to the business if he was given more responsibility in the main factory producing area, which covered the accounts for all the Byrne's businesses. Sean could sense that his brothers were a little jealous of the treatment he was receiving from his father, but they had to admit that Sean had talents that they did not possess. Nuala was very proud of her son, and Clodagh was equally proud, as she had brought him up in the absence of his mother. Clodagh had realised early on that Nuala had felt that it was essential that she participated completely in the Byrne businesses, otherwise her life with Connell would have been unbearable, so she did not blame her for neglecting her son. All her father was interested in was being successful in business. It did give good lives to them all, but affection had been sorely lacking from him. Nuala had been more affectionate, but her time was limited. Theirs was not a family where women dressed prettily and drank afternoon tea and had no further thoughts other than how clever they felt their children were in comparison to others. Aidan was not taking his career very seriously, and many times he could be found waiting in the grounds of the factory for Sean to finish work. They would then go off together and normally ended up at the Byrnes' home, where Aidan dined with them, after which he and Sean played cards or found some other pastime to occupy them. "Doesn't Aidan ever spend time at his own home?" asked Connell testily one day. "I don't think he is particularly interested in the career that his parents have pushed him into," said Sean. "He really seems to have no aim in life, which is a shame, because he does have a very nice nature under the grumpy face that he is showing to everyone at the moment." "I haven't noticed that he is grumpy," said Nuala. "Neither have I," said Clodagh. "Really? Well, he certainly shows it to the young ladies that mothers introduce him to, and his work gives him no pleasure," said Sean. "He only seems happy when he is with us, or talking to the women working in the factory. I will admit that he has changed since he left university, but I still get on very well with him." Muttered his father thoughtfully. Over the following months, Sean kept the accounts in immaculate order, and quite often he and his father had in-depth discussions on how to further the business and some of Sean's ideas Connell put into practice. Nearly every day when Sean closed his books, he would look around and Aidan would be waiting for him, which began to puzzle Sean, and to a small extent annoy him. And then one afternoon he was unaware of Aidan coming into the office, and the first that he knew that he was there was when Aidan put his arms around him. Sean jumped and asked him what he thought he was doing. "You know what I'm doing, and I can tell that you are not really surprised," said Aidan. "I'm not sure what you mean. We get on very well, Aidan, and always have done. But what are you asking of me?" said Sean quietly. "I know that you really do not like girls, so you are the same as me. We do not need girls, as we have one another," said Aidan. "This isn't right, Aidan, and I do like girls. I just haven't found one that I feel I could live with. I will admit that I could live with you, Aidan, but that will never be. You know that," said Sean. "I've always enjoyed being with you, Sean, and I feel for you what most men feel for women, and I truly think that you feel the same for me," said Aidan. "I don't really feel the same as you. I think about what we are going to do in our spare time, and whatever I plan includes you," said Sean. "Well, that's exactly what love is, Sean. So what are we going to do about it? I would like us to move in together, and we would have a good life. Nobody needs to know that we are a couple. It would just be two men living under the same roof. But our time together, free of outside interference, would be wonderful," said Aidan. "We have been as close as brothers. In fact, we have been probably closer. We know what we are both thinking without having to say it, but that is not love. I think that we should just continue as we always have done and pretend today never happened. We should keep to ourselves, whatever it is that you feel," said Sean. A look of acute pain crossed Aidan's face. "I apologise. I obviously have misunderstood our friendship over the years. I thought that you felt the same way that I did, and that now was the time to act upon those feelings. I am sorry that I have embarrassed you, Sean." "I'm not embarrassed, Aidan. I just did not realise what was happening. I am truly naive, and you have given me a lot to think about. Please do not let our friendship disappear because of my misunderstanding. I would find myself very lonely without you," said Sean. Aidan nodded and left, saying that he would see him again, probably the following day. Sean sat deep in thought. He had not realised just how Aidan had felt, but now that he was thinking about it, all the signs should have made it obvious. He hoped that nobody else had recognised how Aidan had felt. He then analysed his own feelings and wondered if he was really the same as Aidan, as he had no interest in any of the ladies that he had been encouraged to meet. He liked the way some ladies dressed and looked. They made him smile and feel happy. He enjoyed dancing with them and helping them in and out of their carriages. But the thought of seriously courting them horrified him, and marriage just left him cold. He knew what would be expected in the marriage bed, and he was not ready to undertake such intimacies. Slowly Sean closed his books and tidied his office before deciding to stroll home to try to get his thoughts in order. But what he did not know was that his older brother Kieran was still in his office and was on his way to see Sean when Aidan had arrived. He heard all that had been said, and he was genuinely concerned at his brother's reaction. He had expected that he would shout at Aidan and tell him never to darken his doorstep again, but he was most concerned that Sean had accepted the situation with very little outrage. He felt the need to discuss the matter with his father, and he was sure that a permanent solution had to be found for the sake of the family. When Sean arrived home, his father was waiting for him with a furious look on his face. "You are never to see Aidan Doyle again. He is a corrupting influence on you, and I am ashamed that you did not have the decency to block him out of your life and the lives of those in this family. If the word gets around that he has unnatural feelings for you, then you will be tarred with the same brush," shouted Connell. "I am hoping that you do not have the same inclination as that man. What were you thinking, letting him approach you in that way? How do you know about this? I only discovered it this evening. Surely it is not something that Aidan would be boasting about," said Sean with some annoyance. "Kieran was in the office when that man was talking to you. He heard all that was said," said Connell. "Well then, he must have heard what I said, so you have no need to worry," said Sean, trying to ease the situation. Aidan will no longer be welcome in this house or where we work. Kieran is telling him that now, said Connell. You cannot tell me who I can and can't see, said Sean with great fury. Aidan and I have been friends for most of our lives, and apart from his thoughts tonight, we have never had a cross word. He will be devastated by Kieran facing him in that way. What are his parents going to think? I do not care what his parents think. I only care about you, this family, and our business, and he is jeopardizing all that. You and he must cut all ties, said Connell. I will not. He and I have an association that goes deeper than just being able to cut all ties, as you say, said Sean. So you do have the same inclinations, shouted Connell. I am disgusted with you. Get out of my sight. You have made the biggest mistake sending Kieran around there to confront Aidan and his family. At least I tried to leave well enough alone, which would have eased the situation, and just let it die. You do not know what you have done, said Sean with fury, and he stormed out of the house and made his way to Aidan's home. As always, Sean just walked into the Doyle house, and unfortunately he was greeted by the shouts of an argument and the tears of Aidan's mother. Get out of my house! Aidan's father was shouting at Kieran. How dare you make such accusations? There is nothing untoward in the friendship between my son and Sean. You just have a dirty mind, which goes along with your dirty ways with your factory women. This last comment pulled Sean up short, and it suddenly dawned on him why Kieran worked late on many occasions. There you are, Sean, said Aidan's father. Tell your brother to keep his dirty thoughts to himself and stop blackening both yours and my son's names. Go home, Kieran, said Sean quietly. I will sort this mess out. You have the wrong end of the stick. Just go and try to pacify our father. I will be back shortly. I do not have the wrong end of the stick. I know what I heard, shouted Kieran. Just go. This is none of your business, said Sean sharply. Reluctantly, Kieran left, and Sean watched as he stormed out and banged the door after him. Sean turned and looked at Aidan, who appeared shocked. His mother was now quietly crying, and his father was bristling with indignation. Suddenly Aidan's father turned on his son and shouted, You have said nothing. You have denied nothing. I have known you both all your lives, and I have seen nothing in your attitudes to make me believe that you have an unnatural relationship. Have I been blind? No, sir, you have not been blind. One of the problems with hearing half a conversation is that you only get half a story, said Sean. You know that Aidan and I have been like brothers throughout our lives. We do so much together and understand one another so well, even to the point that sometimes we act without words. Many people would not understand that closeness, but I can assure you that there is nothing unseemly in our association, and I am sorry that it has been called into question, and even more so because it has been called into question by a member of my family. You are very eloquent in your denial, Sean, but I have yet to hear what my son has to say on the subject. I do understand that you have no such leanings, but I now wonder about my son, said Aidan's father sadly. Well, do not wonder about him, and I think that his silence is because he is shocked, and when my father confronted me, I did not know what he was saying, and was shocked enough not to know how to respond. I know that Aidan must feel the same, said Sean. There was a silence for a few minutes, while Mr. Doyle studied Sean to the point that he felt uncomfortable. You are not a very good liar, Sean. I have no doubt that your feelings are as you say, but I am not so sure about Aidan's, and I believe that you are trying to cover for him, said Aidan's father. It may be a good idea for you both to part company for a while, as you do not want to be tarred by the same brush. There is no need for us to part company, which were the first words that Sean had heard Aidan utter. I would never do anything that would jeopardize the friendship that Sean and I have. We have always been close, and hopefully will continue to be so, with no unseemly behaviour on either of our parts. Good night, Sean. I will go to my room now, as I need to get my thoughts in order. I am sorry that you have been so upset, Mother and Father, and Sean also. I will see you all tomorrow. We need to talk about this, Aidan, said Mr. Doyle. Tomorrow will be soon enough, Father, said Aidan, and he left the room. We have a great deal to sort out, but thank you for coming, Sean. I suppose you will now have to try to calm your family down, and no doubt you agree that all this is best kept within our families, said Mr. Doyle. Sean quickly made the short journey back to his own home, and he walked into a house that seemed unusually quiet. His mother and father were nowhere to be seen. Clodagh was the only one to be found, which was a relief to Sean. "I suppose you've heard what has been said," said Sean to Clodagh, to which she nodded. "Where are mother and father?" "Father has taken himself back to the factory, and Nuala is in her bedroom," said Clodagh. "They are both very upset. I can't think why. I have done nothing wrong," said Sean. "Haven't you, Sean? You may not have done, but I think that you knew how Aidan felt, and it was your duty to set him straight before today," said Clodagh. "I really did not know. I realised that Aidan and I had a friendship that was probably more intense than that of others, but I never thought of it as anything other than natural. It is only tonight that Aidan admitted just how he felt, and I know I should have violently reacted to his admission, but I could see no point in that. I did tell him that I did not have the same feelings, but it gave me cause to question my own sexuality," said Sean. "I believe that Kieran will have done more harm than good by rushing around to Aidan's home and confronting them. I cannot see why it was necessary, and certainly not before he had spoken to you," said Clodagh. "I do not see how the situation can be mended." "I think you are right. I am pleased that I can still talk to you, Clodagh. You know that you have been more of a mother to me than my own mother. I do understand that it was necessary, as mother was working most of the time. Thank you for standing by me," said Sean. "You do not need standing by. It is Aidan who will need someone to stand by him. Kieran has told his wife all about what he thought he heard, and you know that she is a gossip," said Clodagh. "She's not the only one that I worry about gossiping," muttered Sean. "Oh, you mean Kieran's latest conquest," sighed Clodagh. "Was he with her this evening, which was why he had said that he was working late?" Sean stared at her in surprise, and Clodagh smiled and said, "I'm a big girl, Sean. I have known about Kieran's paramours for a number of years. I don't think that he hides it from his wife, but I believe that he tries to hide it from his father. I am really concerned that I have been so naive. I trust that everyone thinks as I do, as I know that, should I ever marry, I would want someone that I would never want to stray from. Yes, I have been very naive throughout my life," said Sean. "How was Aidan when you saw him?" asked Clodagh. He had not said a word, which worried his parents. He just stood and stared with a glazed look in his eyes. He denied nothing, which annoyed his father. "I told the family that there was nothing to what they had been told. I also intimated that Kieran had only heard half a story, which gave the wrong impression," said Sean. "What did Aidan's father say to that?" asked Clodagh. "He told me that I was not a very good liar," said Sean. "And they were right, because Aidan had admitted to me how he felt. I will go and see them again tomorrow. Aidan went to his room, although his father wanted to discuss the matter with him, but Aidan said that tomorrow would be soon enough." Clodagh looked concerned. "Do you think that Aidan will be all right? It has been a very distressing day for him, much more than it has been for you. From what you are saying, Aidan has had the embarrassment of being rejected by you, and then Kieran bursting in on him, letting his family know that he is not as others. He will need your support." "You have me worried now, Clodagh. Do you think that I should go back to see him?" said a concerned Sean. "He has his family around him, and perhaps he just wants some time alone." Sean had a very restless night, and he was up early the following morning, determined to call in to see Aidan before going off to his work. "I need you to go into the office and prepare the books for the new factory section. When you have done that, perhaps you could go to Rowan's store and check that all the new stocks have arrived," said Connell. "If you were thinking of going to Aidan's this morning, I'd prefer that you left it until later today. I need the tasks I have set to you. They are important." "I suppose this is just a ploy to keep Aidan at arm's length," said Sean. "Don't worry, father. I know how you feel, and no doubt Aidan needs to recover from the unfounded accusations thrown at him yesterday. I will visit him later today." Connell was spending a little time over his breakfast, and Sean got ready to leave for business. Kieran was glowering at him, and Sean suggested that they make their way to the factory and store together. Reluctantly, Kieran agreed. "I hope that your latest love interest was not with you yesterday evening and listening in to the half conversation that you heard," said Sean. Kieran looked shocked, and Sean continued. I believe that father is the only one who does not know of your infidelities, and I suppose you would like to keep it that way." "What do you want?" asked a shaken Kieran. "Nothing, Kieran. I am not in the market for blackmail. I just want your lady friend to know that there was nothing to what you thought you heard yesterday, and to keep her mouth shut. There has been enough upset over this," said Sean. However, it was unfortunate, as when they walked into the building and went through the factory area, all talk stopped, and many of the girls looked down and continued with their work. Others watched Sean move through and to his office. Sean looked at Kieran and said, "It appears that it is too late for the warning. Now we have another problem to solve, and I am not sure that we will be able to keep father out of it." Kieran looked anxious, and then he turned and blamed Sean for every problem in their lives, perceived or otherwise. Sean just shook his head and disappeared into his office, took out his books and worked on them all morning, determined that by lunchtime he would be visiting Aidan. As lunchtime approached, he cleared his desk, but before he could leave, his father came into him. "I want you to go to Rowan's now and make sure all is in order," said Connell. "No, father. I know that you are just trying to keep me occupied, so that I cannot visit Aidan and his family. I am concerned that Aidan is very vulnerable at present, and no matter what you think of him, I feel that I must make sure that he is not contemplating something stupid," said Sean. "Surely you don't feel that he is going to take his own life? He's not that unbalanced," said Connell, but Sean could see that he was equally concerned. "He has been rejected by me, and then his feelings confronted by Kieran in front of his parents last night. The situation could have been managed differently. As you know, I was just going to pretend that it had never happened, and gradually all would have gone back to normal, and nobody needed to be any the wiser," said Sean. "You are right, but you must appreciate that I felt insulted by the fact that somebody thought that you preferred men to women, and perhaps rushing around to his house was not the wisest decision. I would prefer that your association with Aidan does not continue, and I would also ask that he does not come to our home now," said Connell. "Has Kieran spoken to you at all?" asked Sean, to which Connell said that he had not. "I believe that naturally Kieran told his wife what his thoughts were on what he had heard last night, but I do not know who else might have been told, and it has become obvious that there is an atmosphere within this building. Some of the girls are showing embarrassment, and others cannot look me in the eye. I may be wrong, and Kieran may not have said anything, but any rumours must be nipped in the bud, and you are the best person to handle that," said Sean. "You are very calm and organised, Sean. I would have thought that you would feel very much on edge at present," said Connell. "My conscience is clear, father. My only error was not recognising the signs sooner. If I had done, I could have stopped all this unpleasantness. I must leave now, as I am concerned for Aidan's welfare," said Sean. A very worried-looking Connell just said, "Of course." Sean made his way to the Doyle house and bounded up the steps, letting himself in the front door. He was greeted by the sound of Aidan's mother screaming and his father crying noisily. Sean immediately made his way up to Aidan's bedroom, where he found them clasping their son in their arms and trying to bring him back to life. Their housekeeper was standing and staring in shock, and Sean could hear someone also arriving. It was the doctor. Somebody had obviously sent for him. Sean stepped back and let the doctor through, and eventually Aidan's mother was persuaded to let her son go. It took a little longer for Aidan's father to lay him on the bed and stand back. Sean led Mrs. Doyle from the room and down to the sitting room, and he stayed with her until the doctor left. Mr. Doyle slowly came into the sitting room and put his arms around his wife. He then looked at Sean and starkly said he hanged himself, and he then handed Sean a letter. "He didn't write to us, just to you," said Mr. Doyle. Sean did not know what to say. "Aren't you going to open it?" asked Mr. Doyle. Sean shook his head, and when he was able, he said, "There is no use reading it now. I will read it when it is quiet, and I will tell you if there's anything you should know. I know that you have lost a son, and that is unimaginable, but I feel that I have lost a very close brother, much closer than my own brothers. May I go up and sit with him?" "You have never had to ask to go anywhere in this house, Sean." "You do not need to ask now," said a very tearful Mrs. Doyle. Sean sat with Aidan for hours, and during that time the word had gone around of Aidan's suicide. Connell's first instinct was to go to the Doyles to offer his condolences, but both Nuala and Clodagh dissuaded him from doing so. "I believe that we should keep a low profile in all this," said Nuala. And when Connell looked puzzled, she continued, "We are the ones who created this situation. You know that Sean had the problem in hand, and nobody needed to know how Aidan felt. Sean had told him in no uncertain terms that their friendship was not as Aidan had suggested, and he chose to ignore that anything had been said. He was right to let it be forgotten, and eventually all would have worked out, with no one being any the wiser." "What you are saying is that it is our fault that Aidan has killed himself," said a shocked Connell. "Yes, it is," said Clodagh. "You should have waited for Sean to get home last night before sending Kieran to the Doyles' house to create havoc. But it is done now, and I am going to see them and see how the Doyles and Sean are coping. I will try to persuade him to come home. Your job, Connell, is to calm the situation at the factory. You must have been aware of how the women were gossiping. Somehow somebody knew what had happened yesterday, and I do not think that it is anyone from this family. It is about time you sorted out Kieran's excesses in his affections for the ladies working for you," said Nuala. "What do you mean?" asked Connell. "Yesterday Sean said that he was naive. If you really don't know what I'm talking about, then his naivety is nothing compared to yours," said Nuala, who rarely spoke harshly to her husband. Nuala and Clodagh then donned their cloaks and made their way to the Doyle house, leaving Connell to puzzle over what he had been told. Clodagh did wonder what reception they would be given when they arrived, but it was cordial, and Mrs. Doyle said that she was pleased that they had called, and that Sean was sitting with Aidan. "We have come to offer our condolences and ask if there is anything that we can do to help, although I'm sure that nothing we can say or do will be of any help," said Clodagh. "Thank you both," said Mr. Doyle. "I'm glad that it is you who have called. I have no wish to be rude, but I do not feel that we could have tolerated either Connell or Kieran, as they had a hand in creating this situation." "I am sorry that you feel that way, but I understand what you are saying," said Nuala. "Sean is sitting with Aidan. He has a letter from Aidan, but we did not get a note from him," said Mrs. Doyle sadly. "Sean did say that when he reads it he will let us know if there is anything we should know from it." Clodagh asked if she could go and sit with Sean and Aidan. "I'm glad you've come, Clodagh," said Sean. "He just looks as if he is asleep. He is far more peaceful than he was yesterday." They sat quietly together for a while, and then the undertakers arrived to move Aidan and Sean, and Clodagh left, joining Nuala, who had been keeping Mr. and Mrs. Doyle company, and slowly they made their way home. Connell had made his way to his business thoughtfully. He was going to confront Kieran, and he hoped that what he was thinking was not correct. Unfortunately, Kieran was not at the business when Connell arrived, so all he could do was go into his own office and try to concentrate on work. Nobody had noticed his arrival, and he could hear the chatter from the workroom. "It's true. That friend of Mr. Sean's told him that he loved him. He said that they should live together, and nobody need know that they were anything but two people sharing. Then he said," and the girl talking whispered whatever had been said, and she was laughing. Somebody else said, "That must be why he killed himself, because people found out. How do you know all this?" "I heard it all," said the woman. Connell had heard enough, and he suddenly appeared in the workroom, much to the surprise of all those there. "You, in my office now," shouted Connell to the woman, who was gossiping. Fearfully she followed him. "You are fired. I will not tolerate tittle-tattle in this office, and certainly not about my family. Pick up your things and go. Whatever is owed to you will be delivered to you," said Connell. "Please, sir, I need this job. I have a child to support. I can't put food on my table without this job. I promise I will never gossip again. I will never say anything about your family. Please, please don't sack me." And by that time the woman was crying. "That is not my problem. Get your husband to feed you and keep a roof over your family's heads." "None of that is down to us," said Connell. "I have no husband," the woman whispered. "I have to pay somebody to look after my child while I work." "Who is the father? He should be helping you," said Connell equally quietly, and then he said more loudly, "Is my son the father?" A look of fear crossed the woman's face, and she just kept shaking her head and saying nothing. "Do I have a grandson or granddaughter?" asked Connell kindly. "He is a boy, sir," said the woman. "Mr. Kieran is going to be so mad at me for telling you. He will probably stop the little extra that he normally puts in my wage packet. I'm going to be in so much trouble with him. He will hit me again." She was now sobbing pitifully and moaning that she did not know how she was going to manage, and that she and her child were now going to starve. "No grandchild of mine is going to starve," said Connell harshly. "I must talk to Kieran about this. Go home, woman, and stay there until you hear from me." He handed her a small amount of money, and she went on her way. Connell sat in his office and thought about all that had happened since the previous day, and he wondered how life could have changed so dramatically in such a short time. He was annoyed that everybody knew about Kieran's affair, and probably this woman was not the first. He had relied on Kieran to keep the business running smoothly, and he was grooming him to take over from him, and he suddenly realised that the only dependable son that he had was Sean. Rowan was selfish and ran his store grudgingly, and Tyree needed constant supervision. He then smiled at the thought of Clodagh, who had never let him down and ran the household so that it was a place of refuge for him after a long day at work. Nuala worked very hard in her section of the business, and she also was one to be relied upon, but all these people knew of Kieran's liking for women, and he wondered whether Kieran's wife knew that he was unfaithful. Connell went home and arrived at the same time as Nuala, Clodagh and Sean. He asked how the Doyles were coping, knowing that they could not be doing very well. He thought how he would feel if one of his boys had killed himself, and he really could not imagine how he would react, and for the first time in his life he thought about somebody other than those connected to his business. His conscience told him that he had had a hand in Aidan's demise, but he comforted himself that the reason was his protection of his own son. Kieran's wife Annie greeted them, and Connell asked her if she knew where Kieran could be. "He is working late again tonight. I thought you would have known that, as you have asked for extra assistance on one of your projects," said Annie. Connell stared at her coldly and said nothing. Both Nuala and Clodagh looked embarrassed. Sean was too deep into his sadness to see or hear anything that was being said. He excused himself, went up to his room, as the time had come for him to read his letter from Aidan. "Sean, I had hoped that you would visit me today, but I do understand that I have ruined our friendship completely. I do not blame you. I blame myself, as I did not realise that you did not feel the same for me as I felt for you. I have embarrassed you and my parents and called into question your leanings with your family, and I know that they will now always wonder about you, which is very unfair for you. Life is not turning out as I would like it to be, and I cannot carry on with this feeling of emptiness that is encompassing me. I am so sorry that I have hurt so many people, but you are the one that I am mostly sorry about. Perhaps you can now forget me and make a new life for yourself, maybe the one that we talked about in America. You can do whatever you want. You have the character that I lacked and that I only felt I had when I was with you. Goodbye, my friend. Please keep an eye on my parents. They have done nothing to deserve all this. Keep some thoughts of me with you. Your friend, Aidan." There was nothing in the letter that Aidan's parents needed to see, but he would convey some of Aidan's words to them and hope that it would give them comfort. Aidan's funeral took place 3 days later. There was some controversy about if he could be buried in the churchyard, as he had committed suicide, but Sean convinced the priest that Aidan had been very ill, and mentally he had made an error. The priest was a very open-minded man, and he said that of course what had happened to Aidan had all been a mistake, and he would bury him where his parents wanted. Kieran was the only one of the Byrnes who did not attend the funeral, and the Doyles appreciated that most of the Byrne family had turned out to see Aidan laid to rest. The subject of Connell's grandchild raised its head on the morning after Aidan's funeral. Raised voices could be heard coming from the sitting room, with Connell laying down the law about the irresponsibility of Kieran, and that he was not supporting his offspring as a father should, regardless that the child was his bastard. "How many other illegitimate children have you fathered?" shouted Connell. I thought I had brought you up to respect women and the sanctity of marriage. You didn't bring us up at all. Clodagh did. So if you must blame anyone, you should blame her, shouted Kieran. How dare you say that about your sister? She has done everything for you to the detriment of her own well-being, and I know that she did not tell you to go around getting women pregnant. Does your wife know what you are like? Shouted Connell. With the noise you are making, she will know that now. Are you expecting her to be shocked? Well, she won't be. There are certain acts that she is not interested in, so I must go elsewhere. You arranged that marriage for me, and I have regretted it ever since, said Kieran loudly. Sadly, Annie could hear all that was being said, and she rushed up the stairs and slammed the door to her bedroom. Clodagh and Nuala sighed and knew that the family appeared to be breaking up. Clodagh went to find Sean, who had begun to spend a great deal of time in his room when he wasn't working. Father and Kieran are having a row, and what was being said was not complimentary to Annie, and I am afraid that she heard it. So we will now have to console her. This family is becoming split. Did you know that Kieran has a son? Said Clodagh. No, but it is not surprising. I suppose there could be more. It is not something that I wish to become involved in, said Sean. He looked at Clodagh closely and asked her if she was well. I'm just a little under the weather. It is nothing to worry about. With all that is going on at the moment, it's not difficult to understand why, said Clodagh. Every day Sean called in to see Aidan's parents on his way home from work, and as time went by he talked to them about some of his plans for the future. Aidan and I talked about so many things that we would like to do with our lives. Life around here has now become almost intolerable. My father and Kieran are constantly at loggerheads, and it is affecting the whole family, and if it goes on much longer, it will affect the business which father and mother have spent their lives building into the success that it is now. I do not want to see everything crash down around us. Another difficulty is that it is affecting Clodagh's health. She is looking decidedly ill recently, and I am becoming concerned about her, said Sean. I know that you and Aidan talked about going to live in America. He was quite interested in going there, but he was not too sure what he would do when he got there. I believe he would be relying on you to come up with a good idea, said Mr. Doyle, with a smile at the memory. I've noticed that Clodagh is looking thinner. It cannot be very nice living in a household that is constantly disruptive, said Mrs. Doyle. You know that you can tell Clodagh that she is always welcome here, and your mother also, of course. Thank you, you are very kind and understanding, said Sean, as he made to leave. Sean was greeted by Annie when he arrived home. I had to send for the doctor for Clodagh, said Annie. She had a nasty turn and seemed to be in a great deal of pain. Why didn't you send for me, Annie? Said Sean with some annoyance. You know that I would want to know. She didn't want you worried, said Annie defensively. Sean bounded up the stairs to Clodagh's room and entered without knocking. He was shocked by her appearance, and because he had not knocked, she had not had time to cover just how ill she was. Clodagh, what is the matter with you? Please do not try to lie to me, as I can see that you are suffering greatly. What did the doctor say today? Asked Sean gently. I'm frightened, Sean. I have a growth, and I have been seeing a consultant for a few weeks now. Today I collapsed with the pain. Up to today I have just experienced discomfort. But today was different, and I am scared, said Clodagh. Who else knows? Asked Sean. This is the first time that I have said anything. Annie had to call the doctor, but I asked her not to worry anyone, said Clodagh. Clodagh, you and I have been closer than anyone else in this family. You should have sent for me. I would want to know, said Sean, and he made a note in his mind to see the doctor and get some answers. I need to rest now, Sean. The doctor gave me a powder, which has helped with the pain and made me sleepy, said Clodagh. Do you want any supper? Asked Sean, and Clodagh shook her head. She settled in her bed, and Sean made sure that she was covered well and comfortable, and said that he would call in to see how she was later. How is she? Asked Nuala, who was home from work. Did you know that she has been consulting a specialist? Asked Sean. No, I didn't, said Nuala. I had suggested it would be wise to see a doctor, but I had no idea that she had. What is wrong with her? She has a growth, which is now causing her considerable pain. It does not sound particularly good. I am going to see our doctor to find out exactly what is wrong, as she is pretending that it is not too serious, said Sean. I'll come with you, Sean. "The doctor may not wish to tell you anything, especially if it is a woman's problem," said Nuala, and Sean agreed that it was a good idea. The doctor was reluctant to discuss Clodagh's illness with them. "If she doesn't want you to know, then I am duty-bound not to divulge her medical history to you. Doctor, my sister is keeping to herself the seriousness of her illness, and the only reason she is doing so is not to worry us. What she does not realise is that by not telling us, we are more worried and are unable to help in whatever way we can. So please at least tell us something," said Sean. "I know that she has told you that she has a growth. Growths are always serious. There are some that can be dealt with successfully, and there are others where there is no cure. All I would say is try to keep her as comfortable as possible for the next couple of months or so, and give her as much pain-killing medicine as she asks for," said the doctor. "So she is dying," said Nuala sadly. "I haven't said that," said the doctor. "No, doctor, you haven't, and if asked, that is exactly what we will say," said Sean. Sean decided to call in to see the Doyles rather than go home immediately. And when he arrived, they could see that he was not his normal self. "What is it, Sean? You have had some bad news, haven't you?" said Mr. Doyle. "I have, and really I should not put my sad mood onto you. You have had enough sadness these last weeks without me adding to it. But I must tell you that I may not be able to visit you as much as I would like for the next couple of months or so. I'm afraid that Clodagh is in a very bad way, and when I leave work I must spend as much time as possible with her. It does not mean that I will never visit. It just means that my time with you will be limited," said Sean. "I am sorry, Sean. Obviously Clodagh's time here is not long. She is a lovely lady, and thinks the world of you, as she did of Aidan. You know that we will support you in any way that we can," said Mr. Doyle. "I think that I will make plans for a life in America when Clodagh goes. I'm not sure what I will do there, but I think that it will be a fresh start that I need. I will be sorry to leave you and Mrs. Doyle, and to an extent my mother. But the two main people who kept me here will no longer be around," said Sean. "We do not want to see you go. You are our only link with our boy, but logically it is a wise move for you, and I'm sure you will find some useful enterprise and make a success of your life. You have an adventurous spirit, so you will find some excitement which would take your mind off all the recent problems here. You must let us know what you get up to," said Mrs. Doyle. "You won't be leaving yet, though," said Mr. Doyle, "so we will have the pleasure of your company for a while yet." Nobody liked to mention that the timing depended on when Clodagh died. For the next few weeks Sean spent less and less time at the business, and more time at home with Clodagh. He made sure that she had the correct pain-killing powders, and he found many books that he knew she would enjoy, and they spent their afternoons with him reading to her. Then one day Clodagh was no longer in pain. She just lay in her bed quietly, and Sean knew that her time was near. And during that afternoon she called to him and told him how much she loved him, and that she appreciated what he had done for her over the past months. "You looked after me all my life, Clodagh, and you do not have to thank me for being with you. I have enjoyed reading to you and keeping you safe. It is me who should be thanking you for all that you have done for me," said Sean, and he hoped that his voice was staying steady. He looked across at her and knew that she needed to be close to him. So he wrapped a blanket around her and lifted her out of her bed and sat her on his knee, holding her tightly until she peacefully passed away. An hour later Nuala came home from work and immediately made her way up to see how Clodagh was faring, and she found her still in Sean's arms, and he was quietly talking to her, telling her of all his plans for the future. Between them they laid her out on her bed, and Nuala sent the housekeeper for the doctor and told Annie to go to the factory and bring Connell and Kieran home. They buried her 2 days later next to her mother. Since Clodagh's death, Kieran's wife Annie was now in charge of running the household, and that she did grudgingly. She was quite relieved when Nuala decided that she would now spend most of her time at home, which improved the efficiency of the household and brought it back up to the standards that Clodagh had imposed. Kieran and Connell were still arguing. and it came to a climax when Connell went into his factory and caught sight of his grandchild's mother with very obvious and painful-looking bruises to her face, and the way she was holding herself, it appeared that other parts of her body had also been bruised. Sean was quietly working in his office when he heard shouting and his father telling the girl to go into his office. He also told an older woman to go with her. "Are those bruises down to you?" his father was shouting at Kieran. "It's none of your business," Kieran yelled back at his father. "Look at your knuckles. It is obvious that you have been hitting with those. She is the mother of your son, and you should look after them both better," shouted Connell. "Get out of my sight. You make me ashamed." "Why are you siding with her? She is nobody, and no doubt she has many lovers. I'm not the only one she's been with," said Kieran. Sean sighed and realised that he would have to step in to defuse the situation. "Father, Kieran, please, this is our business, and it is no place to conduct this sort of discussion. Haven't there been enough difficulties and gossip over these past months without you two fighting in front of our staff? Please, go home and fight there if you must," said Sean. "Of course you are right, Sean. I just feel that women should be treated in a better way, and especially by my own son, and certainly someone who is the mother of my grandson," said Connell. "I'm not sure he is your grandson," shouted Kieran as he stormed out of the building. Connell calmed down and went into his office. Sean followed him and was shocked at the sight of the bruises on the girl's face. "It's Caitlin, isn't it?" said Sean quietly, and the girl nodded. The woman with her looked equally nervous. "What is your son's name?" "It's Rory," she answered nervously. "I think you need some attention to those bruises and cuts," said Connell, and he asked the older woman to assist, which she did by bathing Caitlin's face. "It would appear that she has been hurt elsewhere on her body," said Sean. "Perhaps we should leave for a while, Father, and let them get on with bathing what is necessary. When they have finished, I'll take her to her home and make sure that the boy is not hurt." "Oh, dear God, I hadn't thought of that," said Connell, and he turned to Caitlin and asked if her son had been hurt at all. "He just got a slap because he was crying. He wasn't badly hurt," said Caitlin. "I'm not having this," said Connell. "I don't know what Kieran or the girl argued about, but there is no excuse for hitting out in that way. No, I am not having that." "I don't know what you are going to do, but no doubt you will come up with a plan," said Sean, as he and his father left so that the girl could be looked after. Having heard that there was a problem on the factory floor, Nuala came to see if she could help, and she too was horrified that Caitlin had been hurt, and equally concerned that the young boy had also been slapped. "You are going to have to curb Kieran's temper. I have a feeling that Annie has also been on the receiving end of his fist on occasion, but she has been quite capable of hitting back. It is not how any of your children have been brought up. I know that we have spent a great deal of our time here at the company, but you know that Clodagh instilled in them all how they should treat others," said Nuala. "I'll go with you to see Caitlin safely home, Sean, and we'll make sure that the boy is not badly hurt." "It's a pity that all this was brought out into the open in front of everyone here," said Sean, and Nuala agreed with him. "I know you are right, but when I saw how the girl looked, I'm afraid that I lost my temper." "Perhaps Kieran gets his temper from me," said Connell sadly. "Your temper has never been a violent one. You just get annoyed when others seem incapable of carrying out instructions correctly. Your temper is verbal, not physical," said Nuala. The place that Caitlin lived with her son was little better than a hovel, and the woman looking after the child seemed untidy and unwashed. Little Rory had a small cut under his left eye and a bruise in the same place. He looked relatively clean, so it was obvious that Caitlin did her best to keep him neat and tidy. "You can't live here," said Nuala adamantly. "This is no place to bring up a child, and especially not one from our family. Have you any suggestions, Sean?" "It is not up to us to dictate to Caitlin how and where she lives," said Sean. "I know what you are saying, but it is not our responsibility. It is Kieran's. No matter what he says, you only have to look at young Rory and you can see his father in him." "How did you manage to get yourself into this state, Caitlin? You seem like someone who knows right from wrong, and you appear to be better educated than some on our factory floor," said Nuala. "There have been many things that women have to do to survive in this man's world. I came here when I lost my mother, I had heard that jobs were going at the factory, and I needed work, and this is the only place that I could afford. Foolishly, I became infatuated by Mr. Kieran and his promises, and that is why I am in this situation. But my son is not going to suffer. I managed to keep working up until the day that I had him, and I was back to work within the week. I did have to go home to feed him, and Mr. Kieran covered for me over that, said Caitlin. Sean and Nuala were looking at her with horror, but all that was said was that they would sort something out for her, and not to come back to work until she heard from them. Sean put his hand in his pocket and pulled out some money for them, and then they left. We cannot bring her into our home, said Nuala. That would be very unfair on Annie. Have you any suggestions? Well, I have one, but it is pushing our problem onto others, said Sean. Are you thinking of Aidan's parents? Asked Nuala. Yes, I am, but of course it may not be practical. It would, however, give them an aim in life. I don't think there is any point in asking Kieran to step in and support Caitlin and Rory, and in many ways it would probably be better if he had nothing to do with them again, said Sean. Perhaps you could get their thoughts on the idea before we mention it to anyone else. They are discreet enough not to shout about Rory's origins, although I believe that many know about him already, said Nuala. I will go and see them now, and perhaps you could have a word with Father about the idea and see what he has to say. I think we are past asking Kieran for his thoughts, said Sean. Nuala and Sean parted company. As always, Sean bounded up the steps into the Doyles' house, and he was greeted warmly. You have something on your mind, Sean, said Mr. Doyle. I have, and I know that you will both be as discreet as necessary as it relates to my family, said Sean, and he then proceeded to relate the problem that they had with Kieran's child and his mother, and the fact that she had nowhere decent to live. What is the girl like? Asked Mrs. Doyle. Apart from being an unmarried mother, she has been relatively well educated, but now has no parents to fall back on. I hate to say it, but she has been taken advantage of when she was most vulnerable, and now is suffering considerably at the hands of my brother. I think you will appreciate that we cannot take her into our home. It would not be fair on Annie, and of course it is Kieran's home also. I know that it is not our responsibility, and is only Kieran's and Caitlin's, but she is going to get nothing from Kieran, so my father feels that he should do something to help his grandson, said Sean. This girl, Caitlin, works at your factory, doesn't she? Said Mrs. Doyle. Yes, apparently she worked up until the day that she had her boy, and was back at work within a week. She tells us that Kieran covered for her when she had to go home to feed the child during working hours, said Sean. She is not expecting to give up work, but my mother and I have told her to stay and look after her child until she hears from us. We will give her a roof and a home for a while, said Mr. Doyle. It could be a permanent arrangement if we get on together well. We could do with more help around the house, and were contemplating taking on another housemaid. It is so good of you, and I know it is an imposition, but if you had refused, I had run out of ideas, said Sean with a smile. I'm sure that we can make room for a young boy also, and I know that our housekeeper is a very tolerant person and also very discreet, said Mrs. Doyle. I presume the girl would not object to becoming a housemaid. I think she will be delighted to take such a position. I'm just so annoyed that our family have put her in this situation. Surprisingly, I know that my father seems pleased that he is now a grandfather, unlike Kieran, who is not delighted that he has fathered a child, said Sean. You reap what you sow, as the saying goes, said Mr. Doyle. When are you off to America? Asked Mrs. Doyle. Have you made your plans? I have discussed it in detail with my father, and surprisingly, he seems sorry to see me go. But he does understand that I need to get away and start afresh, said Sean. With all that is going on in the family, I shall be pleased to leave all these tensions behind. There is very little to keep me here now that both Aidan and Clodagh are no longer with us. Nuala settled Caitlin and Rory in with the Doyles, and initially she noted a slight disapproval in the housekeeper's demeanour, but that soon disappeared when Rory smiled up at her and won over her heart. Mrs. Doyle came down to the kitchen area to make sure Caitlin and Rory had all that they needed, and she too was charmed by the little boy. Nuala smiled and knew that all was going to be well with Caitlin and Rory in the Doyle household. You know that you are always welcome here, said Mrs. Doyle to Nuala. I think I would like to take you up on that offer, thank you. I believe that young Rory is going to be a great favourite in this household, said Nuala. We are going to miss Sean. He has been a great comfort to us these last months, said Mrs. Doyle. I am certainly going to miss him, and his father has at last seen that his youngest son has more business sense than the other three put together, said Nuala. My apologies, I should not have said that, as family loyalty, or lack of it, should not be discussed outside the family. Nuala, we became family a long time ago, even if you did not realise it, smiled Mrs. Doyle. The day was approaching when Sean was to begin his journey to America. He was booked on a ship which was travelling from Belfast to Dublin, and then going into the channels that took them to the Atlantic, and on to the long trip to New York. His father had given him money to add to his own savings, and Sean had said that it was very generous of him. If you were going to remain here, you would eventually have had a share in the company, and you would have earned throughout that time. It is not generous. You would have had a great deal more than this over the years, said his father. Sean had paid for a small cabin on the ship. He was not going to suffer too badly on the trip. The cabin had a small bed, a tiny table and chair, and the open-top sides of the cabin would be used to hang some of his clothes. It was not going to be luxury, but definitely better than those in steerage. His meals were to be provided, but it was suggested that he take some relatively non-perishable fruit with him and any other non-perishables that he could think of. There was going to be a sailor who would be looking after the passengers, although Sean felt that clean clothes might be a problem. He was, however, quite capable of washing a few items himself, if necessary. Nuala was showing signs of emotion, and even his father seemed crestfallen. He did not have the same signs of sorrow from Kieran. In fact, he looked quite pleased at the prospect of never seeing Sean again. The ship was not leaving until the evening tide, and Sean was packed and ready very early on that morning. He firstly called into the factory and said goodbye to all the staff. He then went to the Doyles and found Caitlin and Rory and wished them a happy life, and Caitlin in turn wished him well for the future. He then slowly made his way to the sitting room where Mr. and Mrs. Doyle were waiting for him. Mrs. Doyle could not hold back her tears, and Mr. Doyle was not much better. I will let you know when I have safely landed, although it may take a while for you to receive my letter. I have always felt very welcome here, and I will never forget how you took me to your heart for so many years. There are regrets, but it is best not to mention them, said Sean. God bless you, Sean, and keep you safe, said Mr. Doyle. And Sean thought it best to leave before they all descended into tears. His last visit before returning to his house, ready for the journey to the docks, was to the graveyard, where he went to Aidan's grave first. Well, Aidan, I'm going on that adventure that we talked about so often. If we had not discussed it in so much detail, I would not have had the courage to do this. I'm not too sure what I shall be doing when I get there, but whatever it is, it will be with you in mind. My father is concerned that I have no clear vision of the future, but I'm not worried, as anyone with the education that we were given will not have too much difficulty in finding work. That will keep me going until I can travel further and find the land that I would like and produce something useful for the community. I might even become a lawman. I have studied legalities enough to be quite good at that. America is crying out for workers in many areas. Goodbye, my friend. I hope that Clodagh is looking after you. He then went to Clodagh's grave. I'm going to America, Clodagh. I need a new start now that you are no longer with me. Our family is becoming toxic, although our father seems to have realised that his concentration on business was to the detriment of his family. He is sad that I am going, but understands my need to leave and go somewhere totally different. He has given me enough to set me up for a long time, and I did not expect that of him. You will now know that Kieran and father are at loggerheads most of the time, but my mother is now running the household and putting her foot down with them both. Annie is not happy, but only Kieran can put that right. We have settled Caitlin and young Rory with Aidan's family. We should not have put that on the Doyles, but we could not have them with us. It would not have been fair on Annie. Father was infuriated by the way Kieran had treated Caitlin and Rory. I do miss you, Clodagh, but I know that you will always be watching over me. Perhaps you are able to look after Aidan. He was so unhappy when he left us, and you know that at the moment he killed himself, he thought that I had decided to turn my back on him. Now he knows that was not the case. Goodbye, my dearest sister. Wish me luck. Sean now just had time to collect his belongings, and his parents were taking him to the Dublin docks. He did not think that they would be able to see him into his cabin. Kieran had not bothered to wish him well. Annie had, and Sean felt very sorry for her, as her life was not going in a particularly happy direction. I hope you're a good sailor, muttered Nuala. Sean smiled and said that he hoped so too. Long goodbyes are not a good idea, so I will just go on board, and you can be on your way, and get back home before nightfall, said Sean. Connell nodded, and Nuala put her arms around Sean and shed a tear. She was rarely prone to emotion, and then surprisingly, his father clasped him tightly and said that it was not too late to change his mind. He would put him in charge of the business, as he had far more acumen than Kieran or his brothers, and he knew that the business would not survive once he had left this world. Sean smiled at him and said, You never know, I could be back in a short while with my tail between my legs. No, Sean, you will never be a failure. Once you are there, you will succeed in whatever you choose, and I know that we will not see you again, and that makes me very sad. But you have your life to live, and being here is not your life. It would be nice to hear from you now and again, said Connell. I will write, but you know letters will take a time to reach you. I hope that you will look out for Caitlin and little Rory. They are settled where they are, but Mr. and Mrs. Doyle are not getting any younger, and Caitlin will not be earning very much. Young Rory's education will need to be sorted out, said Sean. You're always thinking of others, said Nuala. Look out for yourself. America is a big and sometimes violent place. Take care, my son. Before anything else could be said, they turned and quickly made their way to their carriage, and Sean watched them go and then slowly made his way on board. He was shown directly to what they called his cabin, and it was a little less comfortable than he had expected, but he knew that it was a great deal better than those on the lower deck. He wondered who else would be travelling and hoped that he was a good sailor. A sailor came and helped him to settle in and welcomed him on board. I'm sure you'll be quite comfortable, sir. Sean looked around and thought that comfort did not seem the main priority. He could see that the bed was a great deal shorter than he was, so stretching out would not be an option. The sailor had given him general directions to the dining room, but had said that their meal would be late, as they were leaving port on the tide, which was at the normal time for the evening meal. He would come and let him know when and where to go. Suddenly all thought of adventure left him, and a frightening feeling engulfed him. He had the urge to collect up his belongings, leave the ship, and make his way back home. A figure passed by his cabin and then stopped and looked through the open grille. "Hello," said a voice with a slight Belfast accent. Sean answered, "Hello" back, and smiled up into the face of someone with the most remarkable blue, friendly eyes. "You've obviously just come aboard, and I'm pleased to see someone about my own age at last," said the young man. "It is rather daunting, isn't it? Are you travelling alone?" "Yes, and I have never been on board a ship before. I hope that I'm a good sailor, otherwise it is going to be a miserable trip," said Sean. "My name is Sean Byrne, by the way. My apologies, I should have introduced myself. I am Patrick Kelly, and I have come from Belfast," said Patrick. "Are there many travelling on board?" asked Sean. "There are quite a few. These cabins are now full, but they are mostly older than we are, or families. The lower deck is crowded, all looking for a better life. I hope they find it," said Patrick. "You don't sound too sure. Aren't you looking for a better life?" said Sean. "Yes, but I know what I'm heading to, and I'm looking forward to it," said Patrick with a ready smile. "Anyway, I'll let you rest now, and perhaps we could go to dinner together, such as it is. As you have probably been told, it will be late this evening. It is nice to have met you, Sean." Patrick went on his way to his cabin, which was the next one along from Sean's. Somehow the trip did not seem quite so daunting now, and Sean wondered what it was that Patrick had planned for his future. He was intrigued, and looked forward to seeing him later. At dinner later that evening, Patrick asked Sean what his plans were for when he arrived in New York. I have no firm plans, Patrick, said Sean. I shall look around and travel. I think that firstly I should go northwards up to Boston, and on up to St. John in Canada, then across to Quebec, down to Montreal, then on to Ottawa and Toronto, and I will cross back at Detroit, perhaps on to Cleveland, Philadelphia, Washington, and then see wherever it takes me. Patrick was smiling at him and said, I didn't mean to ask you what your long-term plans were. It is obvious that you have no money worries, but once you have travelled and seen all there is to see in America, are you going to return to Dublin? No, Patrick, there is nothing back in Dublin for me now. Wherever I travel, I shall be looking for somewhere to settle and start a business of some description. In the meantime, if I cannot immediately start working for myself, I shall find some useful employment. I have been thinking of buying some land and setting up a farming enterprise, said Sean. Do you know anything about farming? Asked Patrick. I would employ someone who does, said Sean. As you obviously realise, I have no clear plan for my future, but I will survive. My parents were in the textile business, and there could be room for me to start that. So what are you going to do? You seem to be very sure of your future plans. I've enlisted in the army, said Patrick happily. It's something that I always wanted to do all my life. Why did you choose the American army? Why not your own country? Said Sean. My stepfather promised my mother that he would not allow me to join the forces in my own country. My father was an army man, and he was killed, and not even in the line of duty. He was killed by a mob at the barracks just outside Dublin. That was where I was visiting today. The army is in my blood, and my stepfather felt that he was keeping his promise to my mother by suggesting the American army. He even went to the American embassy in Belfast and saw the recruitment officer and paved the way for me to be accepted in the military academy just north of New York, said Patrick. That mob violence is well known. It happened when I was very young, but it was talked about for many years. I am sorry that you lost your father in that. It was uncalled for, but there are some people who still do not think that way, said Sean. You will be marching up and down for a while, although I would think that you are aiming for higher things. It is a course within the academy. That means that in 6 months I shall be a lieutenant and be sent where I am needed most. The training will mainly be learning how to look out for and lead the men who will be under my command. Once I have trained and passed out, I shall probably be sent to the worst assignment possible, said Patrick. I will have a very exciting life and get paid for it. You are doing what I have always dreamed of, but it never occurred to me to join the forces. I suppose that the thought of an army career in Dublin never appealed to me. But what you are contemplating is so different. I am quite envious of your ambition, Patrick, said Sean. You say that I am contemplating this. I am not contemplating it, Sean. I am doing it, said Patrick. Anyway, it's getting late, and I am told that once we hit the Atlantic, we may well have little opportunity to sleep. Also, you have to learn how to sleep with your knees under your ears. I've just about managed to learn that. They went off laughing, and Sean tried to disrobe in the confined space of his cabin, which eventually he managed with some difficulty. Sleep was a long time coming that night. All Sean could think about was what Patrick had planned for his future, and he was determined to question him further the following day, because even the little that had been said was appealing to Sean. It was a purpose in life, and that was what he needed. The sailor who was looking after the cabin passengers came to wake them in the morning, although Sean found it unnecessary, as they had hit the Atlantic and it was very rough. He could hear several people succumbing to seasickness. The sailor brought warm water for washing, and that was not an easy job under the circumstances, and neither was dressing. He and Patrick were the only ones in the dining room for breakfast that morning. It seems that we are good sailors, said Patrick to Sean, as they enjoyed their breakfast. You have something on your mind, Sean? Yes, I want to know more about what you are going to do in the army. It has intrigued me, said Sean. Over the next few days they sat in the fresh air on deck, and Patrick went into everything that he knew about his chosen career. Sean even asked him what he thought some of his eventual duties would be, to which Patrick did admit that some would only be guesses. The more Sean heard, the more he felt that he wanted such a life. I want to ask you something, Patrick, said Sean. You want to ask me if I think that it is possible for you to also join the American army, said Patrick. I believe that it would be possible. Whether you can join me at the academy, I don't know. I'm embarrassed as I seem to be copying what you are doing, and I appear not to have had a thought of my own. But what you have been saying seems to answer all that I have ever dreamed of, and, as you say, get paid for it also," said Sean with a smile. "I don't mind you wanting what I want. What you were telling me that you were going to do was just exploring, and a great deal of that is what I will eventually be doing. So your thoughts are not so very different to mine. I'm proud that you believe in what I am aiming for in life," said Patrick. "I wonder if I could enroll in the same course that you are taking," said Sean. "There is only one way to find out, and as soon as we land in New York, we can go to the academy and ask. It does cost to enroll, but I believe that will not be a problem for you. If we are on time landing, then there will be 2 weeks before the course starts," said Patrick. The rest of their journey was pleasant. There were 1 or 2 rough patches, but overall they fared well, and on their arrival in New York they made their way to a boarding house that had been recommended to them by the cabin sailor. At the boarding house the owner welcomed them and said that she knew what they would enjoy, as she had made the same journey some years ago. "A hot bath and a good meal," she said. "That is something that I've been dreaming about for weeks," said Sean. When they were clean and dressed, they sat down to a wonderful home-cooked meal, and having seen their rooms, they were also looking forward to being able to stretch out in a full-sized bed. The woman was interested in their aims, and having been told that they needed to register at the academy the following day, she said that she would ask her brother to take them there and wait for their return. "That's very kind of you," said Patrick. "Will he not mind doing that for us?" "No, he often drives people to various places, and especially those who have just arrived and don't know their way around," said the lady. After a very good night's sleep, Sean and Patrick were up early, and for a reasonable price the landlady was going to get their clothes in good order, although what they were wearing had not been used on their journey, so they managed to look smart for their trip to the academy. They were pleased to find that there was a place for Sean to train with Patrick at the academy. "We don't normally take people who have not previously applied for this course, but I can see that you have travelled a long way just to join at the same time as Mr. Kelly, and we do have a couple of places which have not been covered. I can also see how keen you are, and you have done your homework well. You have obviously been thinking about a career in the army for quite some time," said the enlisting sergeant. "You both have very similar ideas on what is needed to become a good army lieutenant, and I am certain that you will do very well." Sean and Patrick came away smiling, and when they were on the drive back to the boarding house, they could not help laughing. "I obviously schooled you well in what to answer in your interview," laughed Patrick, "although some of what you have told me you were asked, I'm sure we did not touch on. We do think alike, don't we, Sean? I'm sure we are going to be a force to be reckoned with." "Apparently I must organise a dress uniform. The sergeant assumed that I had arranged that already," said Sean. "My stepfather insisted that I had 2 made, so I have a spare. You are just an inch or so taller than I am. I'm sure our landlady will be able to help with that. All the everyday uniforms are supplied, but I forgot to tell you about the dress uniforms. I did not think that there would be a need for me to have 2, so it has worked out well for us," said Patrick. They found the academy course extremely interesting, and they both excelled in all that was taught. It was noted by the tutors that they seemed to know exactly what the other was thinking, and they both acted instinctively when faced with a problem. It took just a short while for them to perfect their horsemanship, as neither had ridden very much in the past, but they got over the soreness that it entailed and became good riders. Sean and Patrick even surprised themselves at their ability to shoot, and their tutors could not see a difference between what each achieved. They would therefore become known as marksmen. Marching was not high up on their list of enjoyable pastimes, but it had to be done. They were popular figures with the other recruits, and their teachers were sure that they were going to achieve great things in the military. There were a few evening entertainments where ladies were invited. They were mainly wives and daughters of army personnel, and Sean and Patrick cut dashing figures during those evenings. The captain and major of the academy were watching them on one occasion, and the major said, "There is a difference between those 2. You can see that Lieutenant Kelly likes ladies who are outgoing, and Lieutenant Byrne prefers the quieter and shyer ones. It is amazing how well they work together. They instinctively know what to do, and they seem to know what the other is thinking, and they act upon those thoughts to solve a difficulty, said the captain. It would be a shame to split them up, said the Major. They will be more use to the army together, and I can think of some problem areas where they will be of more use than many others that we have trained. You're right. I'll make sure that they are kept together, said the captain. They continued watching as Sean and Patrick charmed the ladies in their arms. True to his word, the captain found them an assignment together at a fort near some of the Indian territories, and when they arrived they realised that their earlier thoughts had been correct, as it was probably the worst-run fort in existence. They also learned that the previous lieutenant had died in mysterious circumstances, so they knew that they would have to sort out some serious difficulties. A captain was in charge, and a big and burly sergeant made valiant attempts to bring some order to the troops. On their third night there, they were aware of unusual movements, which seemed to be coming from the barracks, and both Sean and Patrick were sure that the captain was going to be the next target to be disposed of. Ever since they had arrived, they had the good sense to keep their weapons loaded, so that night they grabbed both their rifles and sidearms and quietly but swiftly made their way to the captain's quarters. The captain was shocked by their sudden appearance, but he soon realised that he was in danger and that they were coming to his defence. I think we will soon find out who killed the previous lieutenants, whispered Sean. There were 6 assailants, and as the first 2 burst through into the captain's quarters, Sean and Patrick fired in unison, and both attackers fell. The other 4 soldiers assumed that the captain had been shot, and they were laughing as they approached the door, only to be met by 2 more shots, this time from rifles, and a further 2 fell to the ground. All Sean and Patrick now had to hand were their bayonets, which they quickly fixed, but they had no need to use them, as the sergeant appeared on the scene and dispensed with one of the assailants, and the captain stepped forward and shot the last one. "What do you want to do now?" asked the sergeant of the captain, who shook his head, not knowing what should now happen. So the sergeant turned to Sean and Patrick, both of whom started to talk, but Patrick backed away as he knew that Sean would make the same decision as he would have made. "Get the men on parade and we'll take it from there," said Sean. The bugler was on hand, and quickly the troops appeared and stood in line. The doctor checked the bodies and confirmed that they were dead, and Sean then continued, "Get a burial detail and get rid of these bodies." "What, tonight, sir? Surely tomorrow morning will be soon enough," said the sergeant. "No, Sergeant, I want them buried tonight, and I want these troops to show me their marching skills until they drop," said Sean. Tonight's episode had to be planned within hearing of most of these men, and not one gave any warning of the murderous intent, and you can warn them that Lieutenant Kelly and I have eyes in the backs of our heads, should any of the men try anything similar to tonight's episode. "Get them organised, Sergeant, and we will be watching all night if necessary." The sergeant saluted, and he had a smile on his face, which conveyed that at last he was going to be in a unit that eventually he would be proud of. When Sean and Patrick left, it had indeed become a fort to be proud of, with soldiers who had become dedicated to the army. They were sent to many places, but none had been so unruly as that of their first assignment. Eventually they were sent to a half-built fort on the edge of the Badlands. It was a place where, if the men saw an Indian, they killed him, and if an Indian saw one of their soldiers, they killed him. "There has to be a way to sort this out," said Patrick to the major in charge. "Why is there so much animosity between us and the Indians? There are many forts running smoothly in and near Indian encampments. What makes here so different?" "They just hate us, and of course that makes us hate them," said the major. "Have you tried talking to them?" asked Patrick. "When we started building this fort, I believed that all was sorted out amicably, but soon afterwards they took umbrage at us being here," said the major. "But this fort is only half built. Obviously something has upset them since it was started," said Sean. "Perhaps we should find out what it is." "How are we going to do that, as the sight of us moving towards their encampment would mean death to us, and them moving towards us would mean death to them," said the major jovially. Sean did not think that it was a laughing matter, and he suggested that one of their scouts approach the chief and arranged a meeting. The major said that he was not going to risk his life in that way. Sean and Patrick stared at him in disgust, and Patrick said that if it could be arranged, then they would go. "Well, if you do get it organised, I don't want to lose both of you," said the major. Sean and Patrick just shook their heads in despair. Later they decided who should go into the encampment, and it was to be Patrick, but Sean would be positioned nearby to join him if necessary. They succeeded in making tentative arrangements to see the chief of the local Kiowa tribe, and they made very careful plans. Sean and his troop would be waiting nearby, and Patrick and a couple of soldiers would venture into the encampment with 2 of their scouts and another who hopefully could interpret the conversation. Patrick's face belied his feeling of fear, and the confidence that he showed impressed the chief. The outcome of the meeting was that the fort was being built on the Kiowa sacred grounds, which was not according to the original agreement, and the chief brought out a very battered map which showed a very different place for the fort. There were signatures at the base of the map, and Patrick knew that they were of the colonel and major who were in the area before the fort was started. "White men never keep their promises," said the chief bitterly, "and your soldiers only have to see one of us and they kill, so we now do the same." "I do not think that our current major has seen this map, and the fort was most probably being built in a convenient place. There is no sign of such an agreement at the fort, so the previous people in control did not pass the information on to us. I will go back and tell the major what we have discussed, and if I may, I will return with a solution to the problem." "Thank you for consenting to see me today," said Patrick. "I know that you and your partner have only just arrived, and I am pleased that you have gone to the trouble of understanding our annoyance. You have shown great courage in coming here," said the chief gruffly. Patrick then apologised for not knowing any of the formalities, but he said that he would hope that the next time he came he would be more familiar with the ways of the great Kiowa nation. Slowly Patrick rode out of the Indian village. His instinct was to ride quickly, but he managed not to look anxious to leave, and eventually he joined Sean, who breathed a sigh of relief, although he really knew that Patrick would come out unscathed. The major was horrified that it was the army who had encroached on forbidden territory. To the best of his knowledge, Patrick showed on a map what had originally been agreed, and the major had to admit that it was a much better area than where they currently were trying to build. "Would it be so difficult to move?" asked Sean. "That is rather defeatist," said the major. "No, it would just be showing the Kiowa that we make mistakes and that we are perfectly willing to put it right. It is an error, and their attitude now is that white men always break promises, which have led to the deaths of many on both sides. Would you like someone to build on your garden when they were meant to build next door to you?" asked Patrick. "When you put it like that, I can see what you mean," said the major. The sergeant was called in on the discussions, and he had to agree that where the fort had originally been planned was a much better site. It was nearer the river, and the ground was more suitable for the building. "I believe that if you do this, you may get a great deal of help from the Kiowas. I know that the chief understands that you were unaware of the original agreement, although he may think that it was through a total lack of thought and efficiency, but he will keep that to himself," said Patrick. "It has been very difficult to sink wood for the outside edge of the fort here," said the sergeant. "I'm sure we would have better luck nearer the river. The barracks can be easily rebuilt, as can the officers' quarters. The kitchen and wash areas are outside anyway. We could soon have a fort where we could have married quarters and not be looking over our shoulders at every second of the day." Finally the major agreed that a move would be advisable, and he asked if it would be possible for him to see the chief and discuss the new area with him. Later Sean said to Patrick that it seemed that they had completed their task at that fort. "No doubt we will be moved on to another problem area, but I think there is something on your mind." I didn't want to say anything before it is all sorted out between the major and the chief, but I could see that there were a couple of white children living in the camp, and they didn't seem too happy about it. Once all is finalised, I think we should try to remove them and get them to somewhere safe. There may be others there who want to be taken away, but it will have to be done with the Kiowa's agreement and our powers of persuasion," said Patrick. Once the building of the new fort was underway, it was noticed that quite often those from the encampment not only watched but helped with some of the heavier work, and the major commented that it was obvious that the Kiowa could not wait for them to move. It was at that time that Patrick and Sean approached the major and informed him that there appeared to be white people in the village, and they would like to speak to the chief and try to persuade him to release them, and then they would take them to the nearest town to be cared for. Surprisingly, the chief immediately agreed to release the captives, and he also instructed other white people who were living there to come forward, and through one of the scouts they were asked if they wanted to leave or stay. Some had been with the tribe for so long that they could not contemplate a life elsewhere. But apart from the 2 children, there was an older woman. However, they found out later that she was only 18, but looked a great deal older. Sean and Patrick were being sent to another territory, and having said farewell to the Major and all else in that area, as well as the Kiowa chief, off they went with the 2 children and the young girl, who they took to a small town that was 2 days away from the Indian village, and then they went on their way to the next assignment. They became quite proficient at negotiating the release of many captives from the various Indian tribes. They learnt some of the languages, but never were confident enough not to take someone who spoke the language efficiently. Sean and Patrick were always called upon should negotiations be needed in the release of various captives, and at one stage they took part in a serious skirmish on the Mexican border, where they met up with many soldiers from many parts of America. At other times they were involved in fighting marauding Indians and bandits and cattle thieves. They had all the excitement that they had initially looked for, and which they had now found. It was a tough life, but they loved it. They were attractive men, and therefore had their pick of women, but they were both very cautious in their choices, as they were well aware that sexual diseases were easily contracted. However, Patrick did get very close to one girl who was the daughter of a travelling cleric of a religious sect. She thought she was pregnant, and Patrick went through a very brief form of marriage conducted by her father, but the outcome was that she had been mistaken, and they both went their separate ways. Her father assured him that it was not a registered marriage, so did not count. Sean thought this was strange, but did not query it further. When they had been in the army and on difficult assignments for nearly 10 years, they felt that the time had come to take a rest, and they applied to be permanently settled in one place for a while, and that was when Benson became their posting. It would be good to be in a sleepy little town for a while. When we get bored, we can apply for another posting, said Sean. Little did they realise that they were embarking on the most exciting and entertaining time in their lives. They were quite impressed with the facilities at the fort at Benson, and after reporting to Colonel Weston, who was in charge, they were shown to their shared quarters, which appeared quite comfortable. Lieutenant Ben Webber had been assigned to show them around the town of Benson the following day, and they had smiled and thanked him, although they thought that it could possibly be a waste of time. The next day they sauntered into Benson with Ben Webber, who pointed out the various establishments and who owned and lived in them. Sean thought that it was a far more interesting place than they had thought. Patrick was looking across to the other side of the street, where he had caught sight of a very pretty woman. She looked across at them, and her very green eyes glinted in the sunlight. She was about to raise her hand to wave at Ben, when a young man caught up with her and diverted her attention. "Who is that?" asked Patrick of Ben. Ben immediately knew who he was talking about, and he answered that she was Mrs. Lisa Marchant, and Patrick seemed disappointed that she was married, and he commented as such. Ben thought about it and then said, "I should have said that she is the widow, Lisa Marchant." "Oh, good," said Patrick, which amused both Sean and Ben. "I'll introduce you if you like," said Ben, but Lisa had disappeared into the general store and was lost from view. "Don't worry, I would take you to be introduced, but I must now get back to the fort, and I think you are also on duty soon. I know that Captain Graves wants to see you this afternoon." "Of course," said Patrick, but he was disappointed. Sean and Patrick were immediately sent on an assignment which their reputation had shown that only they could handle, and they did not return to Benson until the day before Christmas Eve. They needed to rest on that day, and knew that it would be too busy in town for any introductions. Sean had been regaled by Patrick during their time away about how he could not wait to see Lisa Marchant. "I'm sure she will be at the church on Christmas morning, so we could make our way to the service. Ben will tell us when it is, so you'll be able to meet her then," said Sean with an understanding smile, and he was right, as there in the front row was Lisa sitting with the young man who had diverted her attention previously. When the service was over, Ben took the opportunity to introduce both Sean and Patrick to various people outside the church, and eventually came to Lisa, who was holding a very young child in her arms. She was standing with several people, one of whom was a middle-aged woman who kindly invited them both to join them for Christmas lunch, and from the invitation it was obvious that Lisa would be there also. Sean was surprised at the speed that Patrick accepted the invitation, and they all walked from the church to the general store, with Patrick asking if he could carry the young boy, who could be no other than Lisa's child, as his green eyes were identical to hers, although his hair was so fair that it was almost white. That was the beginning of Patrick's and Lisa's love affair and eventual marriage, and it was also the beginning of Sean's contentment living in close proximity to them and being accepted and settled in Benson. He was very happy for Patrick, and he delighted in the fact that he felt that he was part of the Benson family, and especially that of Patrick's and Lisa's. These short stories cover many of the characters featuring in the Lisa Marchant series. They are available on YouTube at the Lisa Marchant series -LMS10, and a like and subscribe to this channel would be appreciated.